it's about the environmental aspect or ecological aspect of capitalism, and the myth that says, you know, capitalism is nature friendly by its nature, or if it's not, then we can make it nature friendly. It has the capacity to become nature friendly. But the title I have chosen for this week is you know, it puts two concepts that have become recently very popular. Anthropocene versus Capitalocene. Now, Anthropocene comes from a group of scientists, geologists, I believe, to mark the more recent changes in the history of the geological history of the planet. And have we talked about that concept before in this class? Anybody knows the meaning of that? Anthropocene? Yeah.
It's like the current state of the world, basically, as being like the most perfect kind of like space for life to flourish. That we are like this period of time that we're currently in, with like the most diversity of life and resource available.
Is that Anthropocene or Holocene?
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, what anthro means, and like in anthropology.
Human.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so anthropo means humans, but scene means new, and it's an era, it's a new era where humans are the major factor, the major cause of changes in the planet. So they, as you know, geologists divide the history of the planet between geological periods, and the very last one, the very last big one, which started 65 million years ago when an asteroid hit the Earth and the dinosaurs disappeared, and that's called the Age of Mammals, and so on and so forth. It's also called, I think, the Cenozoic or something, which means Zoe means life, and Cene, as I said, means new, so new life, the Age of Mammals. It started 65 million years ago, and then, if I'm correct, then divided between 5 sub-periods, and the very last one was called Holocene. Holo means whole, Cene new, the new whole, the new totality. And that started about 12,000 years ago, when the very last major ice age ended, and that paved the way for human civilizations to flourish, because the temperature, as I was showing in another graph, the temperature started to become stabilized, and we could grow agriculture. We could go for agriculture, and that gave birth to a new mode of civilization, and so on and so forth. And that gave us a good stability and increased this diversity, as you said, and things like that. But then now scientists have serious doubts that this is still the case, especially since 1950s, when things have started to go out of balance, and we are now the temperature is suddenly increasing. That's called hockey stick. When you look at its graph, it's almost the same to the 50s, and then all of a sudden it shoots up. You have those nonsense things that is the sun causing the problem. The sun is getting bigger. That becomes bigger over trillions of years or billions of years, not over just few decades. So and then and then scientists are saying, well, considering that the impact of human determines and reforms and changes the planet significantly, it should be called Anthropocene. Humans are doing this now. Before that, humans were just part of the ecosystem, and they were being affected as much as the other creatures were being affected, but now there are the major players. Now, again, that's when you say that to a sociologist or anthropologist or a social scientist or an activist, that's a good that's still a good step forward, but it has its own problems. What's the problem with Anthropocene? from a more kind of, if you take a social view.
More everyone is contributing to the destruction of.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. When you say humans, so that means everybody is doing that. Everybody is responsible. But as you may remember from the second reading and a bit of the first reading, due to the inequality, someone who is a slum dweller in India is not actually equally responsible as someone, a super rich person in America or China. So to say that humans are responsible, it's you're either saying that everybody is equally responsible, or you're saying that the slum dwellers in India are not humans. We are only humans. So that's problematic. So that's why people like Jason Moore have come with the idea of Capitalocene or web of life. Also, another term they added to the literature, and they say let's mention what really is behind all of this. It's not events. Again, Anthropocene people would say, but it's humans, right? We had it before capitalism, and we say, okay, we acknowledge that we had these problems before capitalism, but capitalism is the major, turbocharger thing. Okay, so now I talked too much about the title only. Now that's the myth and or emotion and the response to this. The assumption behind it to support the myth is that capitalism is flexible. It's about demand and supply. It's about markets and interactions between people. Capitalism does not require huge intervention from the big brother, meaning government, to control everything. It's impossible to plan our relation, to plan through planning. Our relationship with the environment is too complex. We should leave it to the market. And one of the good things about capitalism is that it responds to the demands. And wherever you've got a huge problem growing and many more people are becoming concerned, that means demand. People demanding a solution for their problem. Farmers being affected, they demand solutions by the climate change. Cities are being affected, they demand solutions, right? And capitalism then realizes, wow, there is a good way of making money out of this demand by responding to this demand, and it moves all the markets would move all the resources to that area, and it's problem solved in the best way, most efficient way possible. Now, that's the argument for this, one of the arguments. But the counter argument is that, to expect a system that is the cause of the problem, to solve the problem, is unrealistic. And not that the system cannot fix itself, maybe it can, but if only wisdom is injected to it, and it still has many limitations. And as I said before, one of the reasons that system hasn't shown significant interest, despite the demand is huge, the majority of populations are so worried and they're concerned. It's more than decades, more than a decade or a few decades that people are demanding solutions to environmental problems. We haven't seen much of mobilization of resources. And as I said before, the reason for that is that because of that capacity of capitalism to always externalize problems and dump them on the head of the others, the next generations, the public, the poor, third world, the environment, to deal with the problems, and they can get away with their crimes against climate change. So against the environment. So and this idea that we can actually, the alternatives is that based on this eco-centric alternatives, that this idea that we can have green capitalism, that we can have the cake and eat it, it's greenwashing. And let's stop greenwashing capitalism and think more radically, because one of the things that I think we discussed that the difference between crisis and problem. Did we discuss that before? what makes it a crisis, not just a problem.
Is it the crisis season? You have to solve the problem in a time-limited way, like.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's hopeless.
Yeah, think of because when you think of crisis, you bring system into the equation, the idea of system. When we have a problem, the problem can be solved without causing more problems, okay, idealistically. But when you have a crisis, that means solving the crisis, dealing with the crisis as if it's a problem, causes more problems in other places. You've got a serious health issue, you go to the doctor and they deal with the symptoms, for instance, and they deal with your problem as if it's with your crisis as if it's a problem. And okay, just take this pill and go and it will fix you. And then you realize that because the underlying causes of your health problem are not addressed, you are just dampening the symptoms, but you are not solving the problem. And even that pill will actually causes other side effects and other problems in other places in your body. So when you have a crisis, that means the foundations of the system. It's because the crises are caused because the system is set up in the specific way that causes the crisis. So dealing with systemic crises, so crises are more systemic, not local. Dealing with or solving systemic crises, as we say, requires systemic changes. That requires a more comprehensive, more profound, more functional, more integrative response. So for solving that problem, you think, okay, well, that maybe it's because I'm insulin resistant, so maybe I should cut my carbs, and maybe I should go on a keto, or maybe I should do some exercises more. And then you realize that to solve your health problem, you have to actually go for a number of changes in your life. Your lifestyle needs to change, your diet needs to be changed, and that's a kind of an integrative effort. So it's the same with the social system, the same with economic and political systems. When they are in crisis, they require more fundamental, foundational changes, systemic changes, more comprehensive changes. And therefore, greenwashing capitalism or green capitalism only it's dealing with the crisis as if it's a problem. You can keep grow and at the same time leave resources magically for the future generations, so they could also keep growing in their economies, in terms of their economies. So that's too unrealistic, and as we know, it's not going to work. Well, okay, I'll get into more details of why this is the case, but in terms of the alternatives for your final essay in relation to this topic, again, we've got a bunch of reformist ones. Again, I'm not against, as I said before, we're critical, and then we want to be critical. And it doesn't mean that we should, being critical means that we should exclude or undervalue the advantages of alternatives, even if they are reformist. So there are reformist solutions like circular economy. You might have heard of that. Transhumanism is more kind of idea. Sustainable development, which is very much promoted by the UN and many liberal and progressive politicians, green economy, and so on and so forth. You can say, well, they're good. They're like, what the first reading says, the collective actions are needed for them. We need to reform every aspect of our policies, but they're good as far as they won't distract us from more profound and more radical changes we need. And that could be something. So if you pick one of these, as some of the previous participants in this course did, and then one focus on, for instance, if you go to my website, the Common Alternatives website, you will see those samples of the past essays, the good ones. You've got one on universal basic income, which is not related to this subject, but another one is degrowth, which is related to this subject. And well, degrowth is a little bit more radical, but again, all these alternatives have their own limitations. There are good ideas, there are elements of the strong elements of truth in them. There are things that we really want, but we should be aware of their limitations as well. And then more radical ones are the degrowth, no growth, green localism, and so on and so forth. Energy democracy, eco-socialism, as you could see in Hansberg's work, ecofeminism, eco-anarchism, and so on and so forth. Some of them are more ideologistic, some of them are more practical, and some of them have already been tested, some of them not tested. So it's food sovereignty is something that one of my honors students has started to work on. It's a very interesting one because COVID opened our eyes to the problems we had in terms of our autonomy in producing food, because the supply chains were disrupted, and a good number of people started growing their own gardens, either individually at home or collectively at the community level, and that made this idea more popular these days. There is a movement, international movement, with some branches in Australia that promotes food sovereignty, and sovereignty meaning autonomy. So it's a great subject to choose for this. And so biocivilization is a big thing. Biocivilization is not still well cooked, but the other ones are you will be able to find more sources on them. So that's the list is much bigger than this, but yeah, as you can have a look at the Dictionary of Alternatives, the Pluriverse book, and so on and so forth. Now, in response to this idea, you may remember from Hans Baer's chapter that he talks about that Club of Rome report, which became very famous, published in 1972. It was done by conservatives, by capitalists, the wiser ones, under the title of The Limits to Growth. And since then, we haven't seen any significant changes. But that report was one of the turning points in the history of environmentalism, which promoted the idea that maybe growth is not that good idea. Maybe we should go for no growth, and it's considering that the limits we have in terms of resources and they are not infinite. And then it possibly was part of what gave birth to the idea of sustainability, which I guess possibly originated in Scandinavian Nordic societies, and then UN adopted it, I guess. And it's about justice, environmental justice across generations. So we shouldn't overconsume or deplete the resources to the extent that the next generation won't be able to meet their needs. So we should meet our needs to the extent that we'll leave space for the next generations, opportunity for the next generations to enjoy life as much as we did, at least. And as you can see, this is again good acknowledgement that cross-generational and environmental justice needs to be done, need to be protected, and it's not all about growth, but it may remind you of the report, IMF report, 2 weeks ago. We discussed, published in 2016, and they were also saying that equality is good and shouldn't be underestimated, and so on and so forth. And trickle-down hasn't happened, and we should actually make it happen by taking some more redistributive, progressive taxation measures and things like that. And this is also, again, may remind you of that. I call this trickle forward. Would that make sense? I use that term. Trickle forward. Yeah, I mean, that means you make reforms in the system and make sure that the benefits would be trickled forward to the next generation, so next generations will be able to enjoy life. So that's again in the sense that it's a progressive idea. It's welcomed, but to maintain our critical view and develop our critical skills, I would say this is not enough. And as far as we still are kind of in love with growth, it will be contradictory, especially in the context of neoliberalism. And I had another PhD candidate who has recently submitted, and she worked on the impact of SDGs in Bangladesh, and she showed that there are actually, in the context of neoliberalism in that country, that everything again is about the promotion of free market and free trade and so on and so forth. It's swimming against the current. It's swimming upstream, and that's again in many other cases. Also the literature shows that in many other cases, SDGs are contradictory to neoliberalism, vice versa. So again, this raises this idea. It takes us to this idea that again we need to, for instance, we want to ecologize the economy, making it green or sustainable. Then we need to. The reason that we need to also make changes in the politics and make them more ecologized by getting rid of neoliberalism, so equalize them, and so on. And to do that, because we know that corporations would resist, we need to also promote more democratization in our politics. The current party-based system is not working really. It's only represents a few. Okay. Even the system got presentation. Okay. Are we back? Yeah, and I also already talked about Green New Deal. That idea that you remember New Deal. New Deal was a solution to Great Depression in 1930s in the United States, and they said, okay, we're going to increase the taxes on the rich, and they should pay their fair share. And then they said that they invested that money, their revenue, back into infrastructures, and they achieved high rates of growth in 50s, 60s to 70s. And that solved the problem. But now that people say after the GFC, global financial crisis, we're again into the same mess, and we need another new deal. But considering that we also have climate change on top of our concerns as the major concern, so why not making it green? So it's called Green New Deal. Now, Green New Deal is a good idea, but again, it hasn't been able to get anywhere, and people like it maybe, and then when the election time comes, they go and vote against it. You take it to by the progressives to the Senate or to the parliaments, and then you see huge resistance by conservatives who are on the tables by corporations, and you don't get anywhere. So you quickly realize that the politics needs to be changed. You are a permaculturalist. Have you heard of permaculture? People who grow their food, so that they locally and organically. So they acknowledge that 90% of their experimentations have failed. So this shows us that as different aspects of life are radically interdependent. Any changes in the system requires changes in other parts of the system. And communities are great places for collective action, as the first author says, and but we also know communities can be places where a lot of discrimination is hidden. And we need to make sure that in community everybody has the rights to talk and express their views. Community's relationship with the environment should be ecologized, meaning becoming greener, and relationships should be more equalized, and communities are about socialization. How many of you know the names of your neighbors? I don't. So it's the concept of community has become so, again, kind of obsolete, empty, as the system hasn't left us enough time to say hello to our neighbors. So it's all aspect, and again, that's another way of saying this is to think of it in this way, using kind of a Marxian terminology. It was Marx. One of the things that he did was that he differentiated between means of production and modes. And modes of production. What are these things? Have you heard of them? Have you read anything about them? No one? No Marx? Okay. Okay. So, well, what he says is that the means of production means the tools, right? The technology. And as technology is one of the things that the elite, the capitalists, and the politicians, and some of my colleagues would tell you that's the solution. We go for a more advanced technology, decarbonize, and we make capitalism green, problem solved. This reliance on technology, why it's not adequate, why it can be even problematic, I think Marx can tell us. Because he differentiates between technology, means of production, and the mode of, and he says that with every means of, and what is mode of production? Mode of production is a social relationship that is formed around a means of production. So, good examples. Well, in the slavery system, based on slavery, what do we have as the means of production? What produces?
Slaves.
The slaves, yes, the free labor of the slaves. That's the means of production. What kind of relationships, the hierarchical relationships we see being formed around it, around this means of production? Exactly, between master and a slave, right? So it's a master-slave exploitative relation. Now, you move to feudalism. What's the means of production in feudalism?
Commoners produce and they give a cut to the guys.
Yes, I mean, but again, but you can add land to it too as the means. And the ownership of the land also determines it. So it's the land and the peasants, so commoners, and then what kind of relationship you have? You have the feudal ruling, the landlord, the owners of the land, who also owns the labor too. So that's it. And then you move into capitalism. What becomes the means of production in capitalism? The primary means of production. Capital. Whoever owns capital it becomes that means. I mean, it's a means, but then you see the relationship is the labor and capital, or labor and the employee and employer, and so on and so forth. So the owner of capital versus the owner of labor. So this is the new mode of production that is formed around capital. And then again, we have seen more changes in terms of technological changes within capitalism. We used to rely, especially in advanced societies, rely more on the factory settings and so on. So the assembly line, which would bring a lot of workers in one place, and that could make things problematic for the owners of the capital, because it could lead to mass protests and strikes and so on and so forth. And then we moved on to more post-industrial versions where it's more service and finance and things like that, especially in advanced societies. and the technology evolved and the relationship changed, and now we have less of those industrial workers and more of the precarious, or we say precariat people who don't have well secured jobs, even if they are educated, and they have to do it individually, have little small businesses and so on and so forth, startups and things like that. So things changes. But what Marx says, it doesn't say, some people misread Marx. They think he's determinist in terms of technology. They think that Marx says when technology changes, social relationships change as well. No, he doesn't say that. What he says is that these things are like chicken and egg, dialectical relationship. And that's why he says the workers of the world should be united and revolt. This is not inviting people to invent a new technology to liberate themselves, right? It is inviting people to change the relationships and then get control over the means of production, over the technology. But then we have seen more recently people who are using Marx against Marx, and what they say, like Paul Mason's book, from my interpretation, according to my interpretation, he says that when capitalism has invaded everywhere it could invade, geologically, non-geologically, and the only thing that is left for capitalism to invade or occupies our privacy, is our private life, personal life, interpersonal lives. That may remind you of Zuboff, right? Surveillance capitalism. But unlike Zuboff, he celebrates that. He says that it's actually a good opportunity for individuals and people to gain control over the means of production, because it's become very virtual and internet-based and so on and so forth, and get the control out of the hands, get everything out of the hands of capitalism, and then it's the end of capitalism. Capitalism is actually making, and you could see that Hans Baer saying that it's self-destructive, and now it has reached the point that it cannot really go ahead with its plans. So that's what these people are saying. But you remember again from surveillance capitalism that maybe internet helped us to have school strikes, or bringing people together to protest against domestic violence and so on and so forth, which is good. That's a good opportunity for all of us. But as far as we have access to the internet, we should also consider billions of people who don't, millions of people who don't. But anyway, then the issue is that now we see that corporations are gaining momentum and influencing the internet, and you remember, I guess, the surveillance capitalism is a good answer to these people. And it's not the first. He's not the first one saying that. I remember in the 70s, 80s, when this book was translated to many languages and reached my country. I don't know if you've heard of it, the Third Wave by Alvin Toffler, and he was arguing almost the same thing. He was saying that we used to have assembly line, and now we have kind of an advanced technology. Today you can think of 3D printers, right? They make things very personalized, and people don't need to mass produce. You can produce your own T-shirt or whatever you like, and that's the end of capitalism. It's the power is distributed through the new technology. We were very happy when people like me, who have young people there. Then we love the idea and say, wow, we don't need them to go for bloody revolutions, and change the mode or production relations. Changing the technology will just solve the problem without going to war with capitalism. Fantastic, we don't need Che Guevara anymore. But unfortunately, that hasn't happened since 1970s. And we see that, capitalism reinvented itself around the new technology, and whatever the mode of production became, it's still hierarchical, and the gaps have been always growing. So the hierarchy has never changed since we captured the first slave. It has become even turbocharged. So it's, as you can see, it's it's this kind of arguments that would tell you that, you know, with the change in technology, everything will be solved, even the whole system will be changed. It's hard to digest when you look at the reality. So it's, you know, I mentioned, you know, I've written something about different aspects of life, the economy, ecology, and how far they are in mess, and that that any change in any sector or section requires changes in other sections, according to a more comprehensive vision. The rest of these slides are only to tell you about how serious the problem is, and I used to teach them more closely or present them more closely. Some of them are old data, but still the argument is very, very relevant, even more relevant than the past. And for instance, this is written by Min-Chi Lee. And he argues that, for instance, we need much more profound changes, and the fact that, you know, that technology would solve the climate change because, you know, yes, that's right. Our cars have become much more efficient in burning fuels, and we're now hybrid, and the electric car may finally become affordable for many, maybe. You know, condition that the source of energy for the electric car comes from the solar, not burning coal. Okay, and then and such things are good, but he actually clearly, the author clearly shows that even using the best of the best technology across the world for everyone, when it comes to economic growth, we need to go for negative. We need to go for degrowth, because technology can only save us to some extent. Beyond that, we still need to prevent climate change, and the more delay we have, the more negative the growth of the future should be. So the society should start to shrink, the economy should start to shrink, and otherwise we'll really in deep mess. So and it becomes more difficult to achieve the goals. So what he says is that at the moment in 2011, according to his calculations, we need about minus or negative 3% rate of growth. And imagine a politician comes and says, I'm going to achieve negative 3, you know, I'm going to shrink the economy. Would you vote for them? Even us wouldn't vote for them, right? Because that means a lot of jobs, and the economy will be in deep messing, and so on and so forth. So it's because of the contradictions that this capitalistic system created between our economy and ecology, and we saw that contradiction when COVID came, between the health of people and the economy. In all those countries that preferred the economy, they lost their health. Many people lost their lives, and the unhealthy people are now dealing with an unhealthy economy, because the economy also suffered. You look at Brazil, you look at, you know, United States, you look at United Kingdom before the vaccine comes, and so on and so forth. And those countries that try to, again, within the framework of their capitalistic system, they still could actually get, preserve the balance between health and economy. They are doing that much better. You know, you can think of Finland, you can think of New Zealand, Taiwan, even Vietnam or China, which is despotic and dictatorial, but still they could understand that if they don't look after the health of their economy, the loved one, the more loved one would suffer. So for the sake of the economy, they look after the health of it. So that's what we need to know, that the contradictions are so deep and prevent us from solving problems until we solve these contradictions. And the rest of it is again some graphs, and that's a very interesting graph. It covers about 500 million years of the past, and you have this Holocene here, and you can see that about 12,000 years ago the temperature started to become stabilized. You see the roller coaster before that, and then there are these pundits, these The nihilist idiots tell us that the Earth was much hotter, in the past, and that was the time where there were no humans around, let alone any civilization. And these are the extinctions that we had. We had 5 mass extinctions due to that roller coaster. And then we had this stabilization happening until it gave birth to human civilization, more organized life. And now, as the result of our activities, what we are seeing is the 6th extinction happening. A lot of biodiversity is gone, the ecosystems are collapsing, and so on and so forth. And it's shooting this out of balance, especially in the new century. And then it pushes us back into the hothouse situation and no return points and so on and so forth. So it's really, really serious. In 2018, a report came by IPCC telling us we only have 12 years to do it. Not that we have to wait until 12 years have passed. You have to be careful. And these Paris agreements and similar agreements come, and the reason you see that these people, agree on something is that because their solution is so minimalistic that makes the agreement possible. And estimations are now showing that, for instance, if we commit ourselves, everybody commit ourselves, and United States doesn't leave, and another Trump wouldn't come, and doesn't leave the agreement, the difference is only 0.17, meaning that instead of getting to, let's say, 4.67, something like that, we'll get to 4.17, we get maybe to 440. Instead of getting to 4.67, we make it to 4.5 degrees. Actually, this research was mentioned by Trump when he wanted to get out of Paris Agreement. He said only about that little bit of difference. What's the point of staying in Paris Agreement? Which was the only realistic thing that you could hear from Trump was that, because that's the case. Well, this agreement requires people to come back and re-evaluate their achievements and increase their pledges. But as every time they have come back and they realize that they have not the far from achieving anything, and that requires greater pledges and greater promises, and then you again sit back and say, not me, you do that. So it's really a serious situation. And every year I present something about this, and it just really gives me, very bad feeling. Makes it very difficult. It's always difficult for me. It's a nightmare to talk about it. It's so gloomy that even I don't think it can't be that. That humanity would just so quickly goes into this such a situation. What was the purpose of creation of humanity? Can we be that idiot? Like the bacteria that you grow in a dish. They grow so quickly and they eat everything, and then they poison each other and they kill each other, and then they die in that dish. And it's just, we humans are behaving like bacteria in a lab dish. So it's even hard for me to believe that, and the fact that you realize how serious the situation is, and then you see that only little kids going on sometimes a strike. The parliaments all across the world should be occupied already, considering the seriousness of this situation. And we don't see that, unfortunately. Maybe one reason is what the first reading says. We have become so corrupted, as if the first reading says they are all the children of Thatcher. I love that. It's not all, that the elite are bad. We also have become indoctrinated and adopted and internalized the logic of the system into ourselves, making ourselves paralyzed. Also, I understand if I want to challenge the system, I cannot go without job for 2 weeks. I should actually then move to the streets. So it's again, contradictions. And as far as only a few of us take the burden of protesting, that burden becomes a killer for those small groups. that burden is huge, and many of us should really come together to take, to take the responsibility and help each other in this struggle. The rest are just some. This is another graph that shows that we are already past the biocapacity of the Earth. Another graph which is one of my favorites is here. In this one, as the very last one, I should set you free after that. It shows the relationship between human development and the ecological footprint, and we all know that. Human development is something good. We all want it. We all want all other countries also improve their human development. It's not all about growth. It also considers education and health and blah blah blah. And this is a horizontal line, and the ones on the right side of that red line are the ones that are based on the human development, United Nations human development, more advanced. The ones on the left side are less advanced, the developing countries. And these bubbles are countries, okay? And then the vertical line measures the ecological footprint, the impact of societies on their environment per capita, and it shows, the higher it is, the impact. The higher its impact, that means the more your country has ruined the environment and gone beyond. And so that green line is the biocapacity line. That's the line where your environment can survive and rejuvenate itself and return to balance. But above that, the environment loses its capacity to return to balance. So what do you see? Well, you see all those advanced societies which have achieved human development, and that's a progressive kind of progressive measure, are well above their biocapacity, regardless of the type of capitalism. If that's a nice Scandinavian social democracy capitalism, or if that's a aggressive Anglo-Saxon neoliberal, ugly capitalism, they're all above their biocapacities. And the ones that are not above their biocapacities are because they're poor. They haven't been able to screw up their environment. So that's the contradiction you can see, despite the fact, despite the type of capitalism, despite the fact human development is so, because human development is still anchored to growth, and growth is still capitalistically defined.